Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of my presentation. Today, I'm going to present about Quechua on the work I've done through the summer working with Silicon, an initiative here near Stanford University, at Stanford University, and Unicode. This internship, this opportunity has allowed me to travel back to my home country, Peru, and conduct field work, working with indigenous Quechua communities from multiple parts, multiple regions around Peru. So I'm very happy to introduce you to this work and at the same time share a bit about myself because this project is very personal. Let's start. First of all, I would like to start my presentation with this word. It's called Ayiyanchu. Ayiyanchu is a greeting in Quechua and it means hello, as many other languages. But what is special about this word is that it's asking about, how are you? Like, is it everything good? And what is interesting about Quechua is that Quechua is an agglutinative language, which means that it's composed of many different suffixes that make a whole meaning of a word. So what is interesting about this, if we break it down, is that ajin means good, like good, just fine. Ya means just or only, and chu is the question, or in this case, the way we make a certain interrogation if we're wondering how, to another person if the person is okay, or you know, in a way to question something. So Ayinyachu, welcome and hello everyone. Um, Similar to other languages that are agglutinative, but at the same time that are all around the globe, like Swahili, hello, Wusu, Namaste, Ni hao. We know these languages; they are very common. But what is interesting about Quechua is that it has a long history of many different parts. It has been very involved by colonization, and this shares a huge connection to my home country, Peru. As a Quechua speaker, I have been part of this whole process of understanding not only how my language was impacted by the effects of colonization, but at the same time to see the beauty of how many different variations of my language are found around Peru, but also around the entire Latin America. So yeah, just to share about Peru, many perhaps you may know that it's very known for Machu Picchu, Los Incas, and what I want to share in this presentation is something beyond that. Peru is a wonderful country. It's a beautiful country full of different flora, fauna, and it has such an ancestral history of many different like relationships with indigenous communities. We know, of course, Los Incas in Cusco, the different Amazonia that we have, the different landscapes that we are I'm part of, that I have visited throughout Peru. But at the same time, I just don't want to think the whole language, in this case of Quechua, to think it as something that is a thing of the past. At least most Peruvian speakers, most people from Peru see this language, and perhaps even other people around the world, as to indigenous languages, to see something that it's part of an ancestral history, and that should stay like that. Some people think like that, but I want to think, and I want to focus the presentation to see it more like as a thing of the present. We know the Incas were great, Quechua was spoken, and many I've expressed throughout, these minutes of my presentation, speaking in past tense, but I want to see the focus of how we can shape the communication, how we can shape the connection of Quechua with other languages around the world, and see what kind of connections we have and what we can do as experts of many different fields to be able to empower these languages. A bit of context on Quechua. Quechua is the most widely spoken indigenous language family in the Americas. We have more than 7 to 9 billion speakers around Latin America and perhaps even around different parts of the world due to migration. So among its different types, its different variations, Quechua has one of the largest populations of speakers of any indigenous, from any indigenous language spoken in Latin America. Quechua in Quechua, it's called Runasimi, which is the indigenous word for language that is commonly known as Quechua. In this case, Runa, people, and Simi, mouth. And just as a quick fun fact, is that Quechua, if we were to combine all native speakers of Quechua in a whole country, in a whole, in a whole piece of land, they would be even greater than Denmark, than Switzerland, than Sweden. So it's very interesting to see that, despite that we have many speakers around Latin America, we're still struggling to be able to empower digitally and develop resources that could help us to better visualize, to better focus the language, or place and a space for the language to be developed in many different spaces in academia, for instance, in comparison to other European languages that have more resources. A personal history. I'm from Peru. I'm from Lambayeque, a very small community in Peru, but my family comes from Cusco, especially from my father's side. And I remember that when I was a child, when I was around like 5, 7 years old, researchers came to my community to collect data on, the language I speak, on understanding, the different difficulties, the different lacks of resources that we have in our community. At least where I live for the first 5 to 7 years of my life, I live in a small rural community of only 200 people. So they wanted to study all, all the things related to us, from our language, from our traditions, our knowledge. And we were happy to share that knowledge with them. But at the same time, even though we were amazed by their different experience, by their research that they came from another country, our communities felt that, after giving, all of these resources to provide them with their studies, that, they, at the end, they came back to their countries and they didn't, mention anything about us. They didn't give any credit to our communities, or in a way, they sort of forgot about our names on all the work they did with us. They only mentioned about the data. So I wanted, one of the reasons that I came back to Peru for this summer is to be able to center this work, to focus on something that is more community-centered, community-led. I think one of the most important things when we conduct research, when we conduct any sort of project that relates data and involves people, is that we are able to give credit to all the people that were part of this work, or the projects that we conduct. Which brings me to this presentation that in general, it has been a project that has been conducted by me for, many years, but with a special focus when I came back to the summer to Peru to conduct something more on understanding the different decision-making processes that communities like Quechua communities do to be able to determine a specific concept in their communities. What is like the whole process that they make so that they come up with a specific word that they don't have it, like they don't have like a sort of reference to, to be able to visualize it, to better solidify it. An example is that we don't have, or we didn't have, a word for science for a long time. So this whole process involved a lot of speaking with the community themselves, a lot of interviews, a lot of field work, a lot of working and traveling with around different parts of Peru to be able to understand what are the different ideas, what are the different concepts that different parts of Peruvian communities have around the world, like around that concept of science. So that's what I want to focus in this presentation. How can we make a close collaboration with indigenous communities so that we can inform global language revitalization? And how can collaboration with Peruvian Quechua communities create a framework so that other communities can follow? And some of the methods I, I conducted during my project, during my work during the summer is, of course, interviews with indigenous language leaders, technical experts, professors, policy stakeholders that speak the language so that I could understand their different perspectives on language revitalization and terminology development. We analyze historical and contemporary cases of terminology development to understand successful strategies and, of course, the different challenges we face as indigenous communities. And we design participatory workshops to map consensus building workflows, ensuring that communities, produce input in the creation and adoption of new terminology. A sort of summary of our aims, vision, and motivation. For this specific project, my aims were to elevate language communities by involving them as being active participants in the decision-making processes to decide what a specific terminology is the one that are going to use to be part for, let's say, develop a STEM curricula. What happens in most indigenous communities is that even though there's perhaps data, it's always spread all around and we don't know where to find it. Or sometimes it's very difficult because there's just a certain group of people that are doing that work, let's say just linguists, that are experts, they are experts in the field. But what happens is that we want to be involved. We want to involve the communities themselves so that they can provide feedback to the work that professionals are doing in Quechua. Our vision was to build a more equitable digital future where low resource languages are included in global technology standards. And of course, the motivation, more than personal, empower language communities with agency in shaping digital infrastructures and policies. Sometimes these decisions are made without them, so we have to be the ones who motivating to get involved into this whole process so that not only one group is the one deciding what comes next for the language. Some theoretical frameworks and methodologies, participatory action research, indigenous data sovereignty frameworks, but also, of course, interviews, focus groups, through mapping, creating flowcharts, and especially the use of Excel. Even though we have here in Silicon Valley many different tools to develop, even greater things, I feel that Excel was one of the easiest technologies so that indigenous communities, especially Quechua communities, are able to document their different words, the different definitions for a specific concepts that they have in their mind and have not been documented. And of course, this is a bit of the experience I've done. I traveled to Tarapoto, which is the Amazonas part of Peru. It's where, it's a zone full of jungles, and it's where the Quechua Lamas community is currently located at. I interview Quechua native speakers to understand their perspectives on how we can, make the communities themselves to be part of a process of decision making for new terminology. I traveled to Cusco once again, to the home city of my father. I also had conversations with different speakers around the world because even though I was conducting work in Peru, I also wanted to have different perspectives for linguists and other professionals like the Yoruba community, the Yoruba language in Nigeria, and other communities in South Africa, from India and South Asia, that were very helpful to really understand and compare what decision-making processes they do, so that they can come up with a specific terminology or a specific neologism. I also have conversation with local sellers not only professors, not only linguists, but people that are the ones who are constantly in the process of speaking the language. So yeah, what is, you already spoke about producing new terminology. You spoke about conducting these different field work around different communities in Peru. But what is the process of getting a concept word or definition approved by the Quechua community? So it's very long. We go to different steps. First of all, we have a rough proposal. In this case, this is where Excel plays a huge role because that's where, we just collect everything, every single idea that comes to mind, or in this case, the Quechua speakers can provide. For instance, we just ask, let's say, because we didn't have this resource before, let's say that we want to translate, that we want to create something that is focused on, that's community center on Quechua communities, to create the first periodic table of elements. We didn't have that resource. So what we did at first is, interviewing a lot of people, talking with different native speakers to understand what are the different ideas they have for specific concepts, because they are words, but they have not been documented. So part of this word is, being recollected, interviewing a lot of people. But what happens, especially in Quechua and many other agglutinative languages, is that they have suffixes. So these involve more about, really understanding what's happening in the language. At the beginning of my presentation, I told you that Ayinyachu is composed of different parts, different sections of words that make a whole meaning to say, Ayinyachu, hi. So what happens in Quechua is that we need to collect the different meanings of these words to be able to understand what we want to say. The whole different concepts, these whole different words that you can see, these small suffixes, each of them have different meanings. And what it's important is that when we come up with new neologisms, new concepts, we're able to use them correctly. And if the community approves them, we won practically. But yeah, this is more like the technical process. We need to collect. What happened here especially is that we collected many different books from different authors, from different linguists and professionals that have worked in Quechua for many, many different years. And we have compared the different definitions on specific concepts of each suffix that we have collected. We have collected around more than almost 200 suffixes. But what happens here is that we want to understand what are the different definitions, what are the different ideas for each concept. For instance, here we are using the suffix ma, which means for this specific author, precisely that, especially that. But other authors may have a different definition for it. For instance, in these specific concepts for specific short words, it could mean of course or surely. So for us, it was very important not only to understand what specific suffixes we could use to create new neologisms, but at the same time compare the work that has been already done by professionals that have studied Quechua for a lot of time. Also, after going through this process of collecting these different suffixes, we go to common deliberation. This is where, after collecting these different words, these different suffixes, these new ideas, we go to discard what should not be used. Sometimes what happens in Quechua is that many Quechua speakers like to adapt or like to sort of simplify certain concepts, like saying because we have a lot of connection, we have a lot of influence from Spanish, and we want to break, some parts of that. We want to get away from that in some sections. So, for instance, let's say that something that happened when we were creating the first periodic table of elements is that a community wanted to propose that all elements should be written in Latin script. So that means that all Quechua words should be written like, let's say, I don't know, like hydrogen. Hydrogen should be something like hidrógeno, like the same word, but we already have a word for hydrogen in Quechua, so we should use that word instead of the Latin adaptation, because that is something that is like a Quechua word that we actually use in context. So that's what happens. But also going to focus groups, the decision making in these cases where we gather as a community, not only professionals, but also native speakers, actual speakers from multiple parts of Peru, other parts of Ecuador, Colombia, because Quechua is not only spoken in Peru, it's spoken in Ecuador, Colombia, Argentina, Chile. So it's a whole process. It's a whole family of different languages that share certain concepts, but at the same time have certain beautiful variations. After that, we go to the execution of use. In this case, it's oral and written. Let me provide you with some. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So here it's one of the proposals, as I was saying before. In this case, we created this Excel spreadsheet so that we collected, this was shared like as a sort of survey to many different communities online, but also in person, so that they could write their own concepts for the words that they're proposing. For instance, we didn't have a word for química, but in this case, as we see here, even though we have certain words that could be adapted to present, to have more like a Quechua specific word for química. The winning word was here química because that was something that was mostly used by most Quechua speakers around all different regions. We have already a word for química, which is not exactly like the perfect definition, because it means like choosing. It means sorting out different terms. So that was not like the specific term we want to look for. So the winning word, the winning definition by organizing a voting system was química here. But for instance, for this word, this was the winning word because this is something that most Quechua speakers use or would feel comfortable to share through education, through the different books, and it's something that we currently speak. So you can also, oh, by the way, you can also follow this link so that you can see the whole different terms that we have collected throughout the summer. As I said, the suffixes, the different focus groups, the implementation. After we have decided among ourselves, among different communities, not only in Peru, we decide to test this. We decide to perhaps create, let's say, a small text, a small book, a booklet, so that we can share it in small schools, so that we can test if communities themselves understand what we want to say about these neologisms. If the communities feel comfortable and understand these new concepts or these propositions of translations for words that are already spoken in Spanish, English, we have won, because they are really actually understanding and feel comfortable to use that words in other contexts. Of course, but everything depends on the community. If they approve it, or if they don't approve it, of course, we continue with other terms. Then we go to publication. This is one of the first glossaries that we have for approved words in Quechua. For now, I cannot share the full definitions, the full terms that we have collected, but I highly recommend that you follow the work of Cámaras de Chicuna, which is a community focused on a virtual community focused on sharing science in Quechua, sharing STEM education in Quechua to multiple parts of Peru and Latin America. In this case, they created a glossary where they have done basically the work I mentioned, but in this case, they went even far beyond, because they actually formalized all these terms. They tested, they went beyond the testing process, and they gather that their conclusion is that the communities approved the terms that they collected. So they continue with the next step, which is diffusion. In this case, they started sharing these words in their own communities, their own schools, and people have started being using those concepts so far. And the next step for us, or in this case for Kama Yachikuna, that group, is to share it to the Minister of Education and to be able to implement it to all schools around Peru and other countries as well. Some takeaways from this presentation that I would like you to take into account is that we need to integrate community leadership, open resource technology, and policy advocacy to reduce digital inclusion, not only in Quechua, but as to other languages that don't have as much presence online or don't have the resources to be able to be empowered by the lack of resources, the lack of support. We have to be part of that process. We have to be part of these community experiences. We have to get involved as professionals to talk with the communities themselves, to be able to understand the different needs, the different limitations, and be able to see what we can do to support them and empower their languages. We also, if it's possible, we need to develop also certain content, like as we did as part of my work here in Peru. We developed a multilingual curriculum, and we are also developing tools for legal translation and interfaces reflecting indigenous knowledge. Finally, we want to serve, I want to see this work as a sort of example for other global language communities so that we can better represent their groups digitally and in a way direct their words toward a more community-led initiative, something that is led by the community themselves, something that communities can be part of the process on deciding what is the future for their language. These are some of my references, and yeah, that's pretty much all. Thank you.
We have maybe time for one question, if there are any.
No, go, no.
Okay, just repeat it, because I'm not gonna run to get the mic. Quechua, I know, encompasses many different dialects that probably can be considered different languages. So how do you handle supporting both Quechua as a whole, but also handling the dialects? Because if we make one terminology dictionary, it may just favor the Quechua speakers of Cusco to the expense of the rest.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. What happens in Quechua, one of the biggest struggles we have is the theories between 3-vocalism and 5-vocalism, which means that many speakers want to write Quechua using 5 vowels, and others want to use it in 3 vowels. So what happens in most cases is that we want to be flexible with communities to develop and understand, the words that we are proposing, but at the same time, we also want to create a standard. So at the same time, it's a very huge challenge because not all communities feel comfortable to using or adapting their own variant to a specific standard. So what happens in this whole collection process is that we take that feedback into account. For instance, here, this is the perfect word. So AI is a word that a scene like this, it may be difficult to pronounce to other Quechua different variants, let's say in Argentina, in Chile, where this specific sound is not easily, be able to pronounce for other speakers, like from Ayacucho or the Amazonas. So what happens here is that for those speakers that don't feel comfortable because they have been accustomed to this word, we leave in, this could be the standard, the word we chose, but they pronounce it in their own variant. They could feel, comfortable to be able to use the term in writing, but when it comes to expressing it orally, of course, they pronounce it as hiyay. So as part of this whole process of standardization, we also need to consider other variants so that we can be flexible to all different groups. But of course, it's a process that is still being developed because there are some barriers from the central part of Peru that use specific terms that are specific intonations, and it seems like a whole different language. So sometimes it's kind of difficult, but at least as part of this work, we want to make something that is flexible for everyone. So yeah.
Okay, we have a break now for 20 minutes.